The world doesn't stop spinning when your life is about to change forever. I should have been home by now, falling into bed after another grueling shift at the diner. Instead, I was sprinting through the woods, my heart hammering against my ribs. The screams had stopped, but that didn't mean it was over. I burst through the trees, the darkness swallowing me whole, until I saw them. 2 girls cornered, 2 men closing in on them. The taller of the 2 girls was clutching the blonde's hand, her wide eyes scanning for a way out. She looked expensive, not just in her clothes, but in the way she carried herself. And that's when I knew. They weren't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were being hunted. I didn't think. I acted. Hey! My voice cut through the night. For pairs of eyes snapped toward me. The shorter of the 2 men narrowed his gaze. Who the hell are you? I stepped forward. Let them go. The taller man tilted his head. Oh, and if we don't? The dark-haired girl's lips parted. Her breath was shaky. She didn't say a word. But her eyes? They were begging me not to leave. Look, buddy, the taller guy sneered, stepping forward. I don't know what you think you're doing, but I threw the first punch. I don't regret it. The impact sent him stumbling back. The blonde gasped. The second man lunged, but I ducked, swinging my fist toward his ribs. He grunted, staggering back. I wasn't a trained fighter. I'd been in scraps before, mostly over money or food, but nothing like this. Still, I refused to lose. One of them came at me again. I sidestepped, barely missing the swing, but before I could react, pain shot through my ribs. The guy's knee slammed into my side, knocking the breath from my lungs. I stumbled, but I didn't go down. The dark-haired girl moved then. Run, she shouted to the blonde. I saw my opening. With everything I had, I grabbed the closest guy and shoved him hard. He lost his footing, crashing against his partner. Go! I yelled. The girls took off toward the road. And then, headlights. A car screeched to a stop on the gravel road ahead. Before I could process it, a deep voice called out, "Get in." I didn't hesitate. The girls were already running toward the SUV. I took off after them, my breath ragged. The car door flew open. I barely had time to dive inside before the tires spun against the gravel. My head slammed against the seat. We were moving fast. I turned, catching my breath, staring at the 2 girls beside me. The blonde was shaking. The dark-haired one? She wasn't just shaken, she was furious. Who were they? I asked. Silence. I looked at the driver. A man in a black suit, gripping the steering wheel like his life depended on it. And then, the girl beside me spoke. You have no idea what you just got yourself into. She wasn't wrong. It wasn't just the expensive SUV that tipped me off. It was the way they held themselves. The way the driver obeyed their every word without question. These weren't just 2 girls out for a late-night walk. And when the dark-haired girl finally spoke again, it confirmed everything. We're Celeste and Isabella Lancaster. The name hit me like a truck. Lancaster, as in the Lancaster Empire, one of the most powerful business families in the country. I had just saved billionaire daughters. I let that sink in, and then I asked the one thing that had been gnawing at me since I saw them in that clearing. Who were those men? Celeste's jaw tightened. My father's enemies. And just like that, I knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. The next morning, I woke up in a different world. Literally. I wasn't in my tiny apartment anymore. I was in a mansion, and standing at the end of the massive dining hall, a man who made the air feel heavier just by existing. Richard Lancaster. Celeste and Isabella's father. You saved my daughters, he said, his voice even. And for that, I owe you. I shifted. I don't need a reward. A ghost of a smile flickered on his lips. I thought you'd say that. And then, he slid a file toward me. I hesitated before picking it up. Inside? A job offer. Work for me, he said simply. I blinked. What? Celeste leaned against the table, arms crossed. Our father thinks you're useful. I glanced at the papers. It wasn't just any job. It was security detail. For them. I should have said no. But something told me. Walking away wasn't an option anymore. The air in the Lancaster estate felt different. It wasn't just wealth that made it heavy. It was power, the kind of power that made you feel like you didn't belong. I stood across from Richard Lancaster, his piercing gaze locked on mine. You saved my daughters, he repeated, his tone unreadable. Most men would have walked away. You didn't. I swallowed. Didn't feel like much of a choice. A flicker of something crossed his face. Amusement? Interest? He tapped the file in front of me. Then you'll understand why I'm making you this offer. I hesitated before flipping it open. Inside? A job contract. Security detail. For Celeste and Isabella Lancaster. The same girls I just saved. I looked up. You're serious? Richard leaned forward slightly. I don't make jokes, son. Celeste, standing a few feet away, scoffed. This is a bad idea, Dad. Isabella, quieter, glanced at me with something almost like curiosity. I exhaled slowly. What was I supposed to do? I wasn't a bodyguard. I was just some guy who worked at a diner. But something about the way Richard Lancaster watched me told me walking away wasn't an option anymore. You'd have full accommodations here, Richard continued. A room in the estate. Protection. A salary that... I don't need charity. I cut in. Richard's lips curled slightly. It's not charity, son. It's employment. Celeste rolled her eyes. This is insane. He's not trained. He's just... She stopped herself, but I caught the dismissiveness in her voice. Just what? I asked, crossing my arms. She didn't answer. Richard ignored her. Your job is simple. Make sure nothing like last night ever happens again. Stay close. Watch them. I frowned. You already have security. Richard exhaled sharply. Not good enough, apparently. I shifted uncomfortably. Why me? I wasn't stupid. I knew billionaires didn't just hire random nobodies. There was something deeper at play here. Still, something in my gut told me walking away wasn't an option anymore. I didn't sign the contract right away. But by the next morning, I was standing in a room bigger than my entire apartment. A guest suite in the Lancaster estate. The bed alone probably cost more than I made in a year. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling slowly. What the hell had I gotten myself into? A knock on the door snapped me out of my thoughts. I opened it to find Isabella standing there. Good morning, she said softly. I raised a brow. Is it? A small smile tugged at her lips. Depends. Are you regretting taking the job yet? I leaned against the doorway. Haven't decided. She tilted her head. Celeste won't make it easy for you, you know. I snorted. Yeah, I picked up on that. Isabella hesitated before lowering her voice. But I think it's good that you're here. I studied her. There was something in her eyes. Something almost haunted. Isabella, those men last night. She shook her head. We shouldn't talk about it here. And just like that, I knew. Something bigger was going on. Let's get one thing straight. Celeste's voice cut through the morning air as I stepped into the main lounge. She was already there, arms crossed, watching me like I was an intruder in her world. I sighed. Let me guess. You don't trust me? Her lips curled. Wow, you catch on fast. I sat down across from her, not letting her attitude get to me. Why's that? She leaned forward. Because people don't just do what you did. Not for free. I frowned. What exactly do you think I want? She exhaled sharply, looking away. I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out. Before I could respond, Isabella walked in. Celeste, stop. Celeste rolled her eyes, but didn't push further. I exhaled. This was going to be a long job. By nightfall, I was starting to settle into the job, or at least trying to. That was until I found an envelope slipped under my door. No name, no markings, just a single note inside. You should have stayed out of this. The hairs on my neck stood up. I glanced around, heart pounding. Someone in this house didn't want me here. And I had a bad feeling. This was just the beginning. I stared at the envelope in my hands, the weight of its message sinking in. You should have stayed out of this. It wasn't just a warning. It was a threat. Someone knew I was here. Someone didn't want me here. I glanced around the dimly lit hallway. The Lancaster estate was massive, but someone had been close enough to slide this under my door. That meant two things. One, they had access. Two, they were watching me. A chill ran down my spine. I folded the note and shoved it into my pocket. I couldn't tell Richard. Not yet. I needed to figure out who was behind it first. And something told me Celeste and Isabella were in more danger than they realized. You look like you saw a ghost. I turned to see Celeste standing at the top of the staircase, arms crossed. Her eyes flicked to my clenched fists. Something wrong? I forced a smirk. Just try to get used to this place. She narrowed her eyes. She didn't buy it. Celeste was sharp. Too sharp. She was the kind of person who could smell a lie before you even opened your mouth. You sure? She asked slowly. I shrugged. Unless you know of anyone here who has a problem with me. For a split second, something flashed across her face. Something almost like hesitation. Then she turned on her heel. Everyone has a problem with outsiders, she muttered, walking away. I had my answer. That night, I couldn't sleep, not with a note burning a hole in my pocket. So I did what I always did when my gut told me something was wrong. I went looking for answers. The estate was quiet, but too quiet. The kind of quiet that made your skin crawl. I moved carefully, avoiding the security cameras as I made my way down the halls. I needed to know who else had access to my room. Then, just as I turned a corner, I heard voices. Hello. Urgent. I pressed myself against the wall. He's a problem, a man's voice whispered. He wasn't supposed to be here. My blood ran cold. They were talking about me. I couldn't see who was talking, but I recognized one voice. It was the butler, the same one who had greeted me the first day I arrived. He sounded tense. Richard trusts him, he muttered. Getting rid of him now would be too obvious. A second voice, deeper, unfamiliar, responded. Then we wait. But make sure he doesn't start asking too many questions. I stayed frozen. They were planning something, and I was right in the middle of it. The next morning, Isabella found me first. You didn't sleep, she observed. I exhaled. How could you tell? She smirked. Your eyes. They're tired. I hesitated. Should I tell her? Then she surprised me. There's something I need to show you, she said softly. She glanced around, then nodded toward the hallway. Come with me. But don't let anyone see. My pulse quickened. What did she know that I didn't? I followed Isabella through the winding hallways, past rooms I hadn't been allowed to enter before. Then we stopped in front of a locked door. Isabella pulled a key from her pocket. What's inside? I asked. She hesitated. The truth. With that, she pushed the door open, and what I saw made my stomach drop. It wasn't just a room. It was a surveillance center. Monitors lined the walls, all displaying live feeds of the estate. Someone was watching everyone, and I had a terrible feeling it wasn't Richard. Who else knows about this? I asked, scanning the room. Isabella crossed her arms. Just me. And now you. I turned to her. Why are you showing me this? Her expression darkened. Because someone in this house is betraying us. My breath hitched. She knew. She knew about the threats, about the danger, and she was trusting me to help her figure it out. I was in deep now, and there was no turning back. Just as Isabella and I were trying to make sense of the surveillance footage, a sharp knock sounded on the door. Isabella froze. Hide. I barely had time to duck behind a cabinet before the door opened. A staff member stepped in, his expression grim. Miss Isabella, your father needs you. Now. Isabella tensed. What is it? The man hesitated. It's your sister, he said. Celeste is missing. Isabella and I ran through the estate, my heart pounding. Staff members were in a panic. Celeste had been in her room less than an hour ago. Now, she was gone. Richard was furious, barking orders at security. Find her. Now. I turned to Isabella. Who was the last person to see her? She swallowed hard. The butler. The same man I'd heard last night. My hands curled into fists. I knew it. He was involved. The security team was scrambling, but I wasn't going to wait around. I stormed toward the butler's quarters. Isabella followed. What are you doing? Getting answers. I threw the door open. Empty. But on his desk, a single slip of paper. A message scrawled in neat handwriting. You should have left when you had the chance. I clenched my jaw. This was personal now, and I was going to get Celeste back, no matter what it took. I clenched the note in my fist, my mind racing. Celeste was gone. The butler had vanished. And now, I had proof that this wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a message. Isabella stood beside me, her breath shaky. What do we do now? I exhaled sharply. We don't wait for security to screw this up. She frowned. You have a plan? Not yet. I glanced at the note again, then back at the surveillance room Isabella had shown me earlier. I didn't need to guess where to look for Celeste. I just needed to find the right camera. We ran back to the surveillance room, my pulse hammering. I flipped through the feeds, scanning every angle of the estate. Then, I saw something. A car, leaving the premises. a license plate barely visible. That's them, Isabella whispered. I turned to her. Can you track it? Her jaw tightened. I can do better than that. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. Get the car ready, she ordered. We're leaving in 5 minutes. My eyebrows shot up. Wait, you're coming with me? Her eyes blazed with determination. They took my sister. She exhaled. I'm not sitting this out. The Lancaster family had resources. So did I. Desperation. And sometimes, that was more powerful than money. We sped down the highway. Following the GPS tracker Isabella had pulled up. The signal was moving fast, heading toward an industrial warehouse on the outskirts of town. I tightened my grip on the wheel. This is a trap, I muttered. Isabella shot me a glance. I know. Then why are we driving straight into it? She inhaled deeply. Because Celeste is there, and that was all that mattered. The second we pulled up, I knew something was off. The warehouse was quiet. Too quiet. Isabella clutched my arm. I don't like this. I scanned the area. No guards. No movement. Just a single door, left slightly open. They want us to walk in, I said. Isabella swallowed. So what do we do? I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the only weapon I had, a small steel flashlight. Stick close, I muttered. We stepped inside, and then the lights flicked on. Celeste sat in a chair, her wrists tied behind her back. Her lip was busted, her dress ripped. But her eyes? They were defiant. You're late, she muttered. I barely took a step forward before a voice echoed from the shadows. Touching, really? A man emerged, dressed in a crisp suit, calm, composed, like this was just another business deal. My stomach twisted. I'd never seen him before. But Isabella had. Her face went pale. Uncle Richard, she whispered. I froze. The Lancaster family's own blood was behind this? Richard Lancaster's brother stepped into the light, smiling. Surprised, he mused. Celeste scoffed. Not really. Isabella shook her head. Why? Her uncle sighed. Because your father has had too much power for too long. I clenched my fists. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. And Richard's own brother was willing to hurt his nieces to send a message. You don't have to do this, I said. He smiled. Oh, but I do. And then, the warehouse doors slammed shut. The lights cut out. For a split second, it was pure chaos. Then, a gunshot. I grabbed Isabella and shoved her behind me. Celeste kicked her chair back, knocking one of the men over. I lunged, slamming my elbow into another guy's ribs. I wasn't a trained fighter, but I knew how to survive. One of the men swung at me. I ducked, countered. I heard Isabella scream. Someone had grabbed her. Celeste broke free, wrenching a metal pipe from the floor. And suddenly, we had the upper hand. The fight was brutal, but we won. The hired men were unconscious. Isabella and Celeste were free, but their uncle was gone. We need to go, I gasped. Sirens wailed in the distance. Celeste wiped blood from her lip. What about him? I exhaled sharply. He'll be back, and I'd be ready for him. The Lancaster estate was in an uproar when we returned. Richard Lancaster was waiting. The second he saw Celeste and Isabella, he pulled them into his arms. Then his gaze met mine. You saved them. I nodded. Again, he exhaled. You were right. I raised a brow. About what? He straightened. That this isn't over. Days passed. Then Richard's brother finally resurfaced. This time, he wasn't hiding. He walked into the Lancaster estate like he still belonged there. But he didn't. Not anymore. Richard was waiting for him, and so was I. It was over. The Lancaster family had survived. Celeste and Isabella were safe. And me? I had a choice to make. Stay in this world or walk away. Richard approached me, a contract in hand. You don't have to stay, he said. I looked at Isabella, at Celeste, and then I took the pen, because this wasn't just their fight anymore. It was mine too.